So I wanted an easy drinking, sessionable beer with just a little bit of malt complexity and some hop character to take along camping to Camp Mash Out. Well, the beer turned out wonderful. Stick around and see how I made it. So I really appreciate you stopping by Cascades Homebrew. My name is Brent. So I recently wanted to brew a second beer to take along camping to Camp Mash Out. Often, when time is short, I looked at the Kveik yeast. So Voss is a version of Kveik. Like other Kveiks, it can ferment warm and it can ferment fast. I've had excellent results using Voss in various hoppy beers. I find the little bit of citrus character that it adds blends in well with most hops. So often when I brew a beer, I'm looking for opportunities to experiment, to learn something new, and this one was no exception. So I split this batch at 2 different fermentation temperatures. One of them was fairly cool, while one of them was fairly warm. If you're interested more about the difference between those beers, well, you're going to have to come back. Well, the beer turned out wonderful, so I wanted to dedicate one video to talking a little about the recipe, the brew day, and then taste that beer. Then in a second video, I'll come back, look a little closer at the fermentation differences between warm and cool, and then also taste those 2 beers and see how they turned out. So what style of beer did I brew? I don't know. It could be a session IPA, it could just be a light crisp pale ale, or it could be just a hoppy blonde. I've kind of just been calling it a summer blonde. It seems like a nice generic term. The batch size for this one was 5.5 gallons, or about 21 liters. Bitterness was calculated around 41 IBUs, and the color 4.5 SRM, so very light colored. So I calculated the recipe around a 73% efficiency, targeting original gravity of 1042. Calculated final gravity of 1011 would have gave me an ABV around 4.2%. So here's the water profile. It's kind of a typical pale ale type profile. Really, I always wanted to build up the sulfate level, about 150, and then keep the chloride at about half that, so around 75. That would give me a 2-to-1 ratio of sulfate to chloride, and then also build up the calcium level in the beer. So as I get into the brew day, I need to measure out 7.1 gallons or 27 liters of tap water. To my mash water, I add 3.6 milliliters of 88% lactic acid. I'm targeting a pH around 5.4. To hit my target water profile, I add 6 grams of gypsum, 2 grams of calcium chloride, then I also add a Camden tablet to help remove chlorine and chloramine from my tap water. So the grain bill for this one is 91.5% of a pale US 2-row malt. That was 8 pounds or 3.6 kilograms. Also 5.7% of Gambrinus Honey Malt. That's half a pound or 225 grams. Then also 2.9% of Weyermann Carafoam. That's a quarter pound or 110 grams. So I thought the Honey Malt may add a little bit of grain complexity, a little bit of sweetness, and the Carafoam, it was really just kind of something I had around that I used up, and I thought it would be a good addition. So the mash for this one was 60 minutes at 154 degrees Fahrenheit or 67.8 degrees Celsius. This one will get a 30-minute boil. So at the end of the 60-minute mash, I pulled out the grain bag to let it drain. So I've been pretty happy with my Wilson brew bag. I kind of find just a simple knot in the drawstring works well for hanging it from my pulley. At the start of the 30-minute boil, I had a quarter ounce or 7 grams of Warrior to give around 10 IBUs. 5 minutes left in the boil, I have half an ounce of Citra hops and another half an ounce of BRU-1. That's about 14 grams of each. At the same time, I added a tablet of Werflock and now 3 grams of yeast nutrient. When the boil was completed, I used an immersion chiller to lower the temperature of the wort down to my hop steep temperature of 170 degrees Fahrenheit or 77 degrees Celsius. I then added in a total of 3 ounces or 84 grams of hops. That was split between half an ounce or 42 grams of Citra and the same amount of BRU-1. That got us steep for 20 minutes. This batch did not get any dry hops, just the hops in the hop steep to help to give flavor and aroma. My experience, if you're brewing a really hoppy IPA, I think both a hop steep and a dry hop are both really needed to get that punch. But in something like this, I find just a hop steep adds enough flavor and aroma that I don't worry about a dry hop. After the hop steep, I chilled the wort down to about 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 30 degrees Celsius. Remember, this is a Kveik strain, so I don't need to get down too low. Then I transferred the wort into the 2 fermenters, and then I pitched half a pack of Voss yeast into each fermenter. This might be my first time using Mangrove Jack's M12. Like I said, I'll talk a little bit more about the fermentation and the differences between the warm and the cool batch in a follow-up video. So the actual stats for this batch, I got a 75% efficiency, which gave me an original gravity of 1046, so a couple points above my target. Attenuation of 75%, which was 1% higher than the estimated, which gave me a final gravity on target of 1011. So I had an ABV of 4.6% versus my target of 4.2%. So 4.6 for me, it's still in a nice sessionable range, so I'll call that one a win. So there we have it. There's the beer. It's really a pretty looking beer. So this particular one is the one that was fermented cooler. The warm one is one I took along to the camp out. A lot of it got drank there. There's a little bit left, but I did make sure to fill a couple bottles to set them aside so I could do the evaluation. I still have a little bit of this one left in the keg. It's not because I don't want to drink it. It's been a really good beer and it's one I really like to go to, but I just wanted to set some aside, make sure I had some available for this evaluation. So the appearance on it, it's a really pretty color. Say it's either a dark straw, kind of light gold color. It's lighter than a pale ale that you expect, say with crystal malt in it, but it's darker than just like a Pilsner or something. So how's the aroma on this one? Still nice, even though it's been in the keg for about 6 weeks. It's got a nice hoppy aroma. I might get a little bit of that Voss citric character. It's kind of hard to tell with the BRU-1 hops and the Citra hops in there exactly what character is from the hops and what character is from the yeast. But either way, it's a wonderful smelling beer. It's definitely hoppier than typical American blonde golden ale type beers. And for the flavor, I always think one sign of a really good beer is sort of when it's got a lot of complexity that kind of changes as you drink it. And this is one of those. Up front, you get that little bit of sweetness that kind of settles. You get just a little bit of bitterness. I think the bitterness one is on track. I don't know if it's up at the 40 that was calculated. But then it's got this kind of grain complexity, a little bit of a kind of a sweetness, a little bit of kind of a malt character that sits on there. So I've only used Gambrinus Honey Malt a couple times. I think it's probably a pretty good alternative, say, to crystal malt to give just a little bit of sweetness, but I think it's a little bit of more of a biscuit character, a little bit of that kind of bread crust character that you don't get from most crystal malts, and probably a little bit less of the sweetness. And then as far as the hop character, I think the Citra BRU-1 combination along with the Voss gives a really nice kind of citrus, a little bit of sort of pineapple, tropical fruit character. The hopping level is kind of what I think of as kind of like a hoppy pale ale, although these days there's some pale ales that are really hoppy. It's not that level, but it definitely has more of those kind of bright, fruity hop notes than, say, like a Sierra Nevada pale ale. So overall impressions was that it just turned out to be a great beer. It's one that I really enjoyed drinking. Definitely one I want to brew again. I think you could easily just kind of mix up some different hop combinations, get a nice, light, sessionable, easy drinking, hoppy beer. Also, using the Kveik Voss, it's a quick turnaround beer too, and it's easy to brew, say if you don't have dedicated fermentation temperature control. I'll come back in the next video and talk about the different characters. As a spoiler, while I haven't tasted them side by side since they were pretty young, there's really not a crazy difference between the two, so I don't think you necessarily need to ferment it cool. I don't think you need to ferment it hot, but we'll see more about that in the next video. So if you enjoy this kind of content, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you check out the next video where I talk about the different characteristics of Voss fermented hot versus Voss fermented cool. And if you think this video will help you build some great beer, make sure you click that like button. And cheers!